Okay, today's lesson is on the development of the embryonic heart. In this illustration I have on the board, we have our three-layered embryo with a very surface layer in blue of ectoderm. Underneath of that, red is mesoderm, and then the endoderm below that. The mesodermal layer in the very center of the embryo has the notochord that runs straight down the middle. To either side of that, there's the somite mesoderm. Then there's the intermediate mesoderm, and then there are two layers of mesoderm, an upper somatic mesoderm and then a deeper splanchnic mesoderm with the cavity and the body cavity coelom between the two layers. Out in front of the embryo, we see that same arrangement that we see on the side with a ectoderm, then somatic mesoderm, then splanchnic mesoderm, and then endoderm here. So it's in this area right up here in front of this developing head fold that's growing upward. So that will grow this direction and pull with it this tissue right in here as the head grows up. But it's right in here in the splanchnic mesoderm, right through there, that we get the original heart, the beginning of the heart tissue, and that's what we will look at next. It's in the splanchnic mesoderm layer that we get the formation of the first heart tissues. It begins as two tubular passages that develop in that splanchnic mesoderm. This is a cross-section of the two tubes that would lie in there. If you were to look down on that splanchnic mesoderm, you would see in there, this side would make one tubular passage within the splanchnic mesoderm, and this side would make a second tubular passage within the splanchnic mesoderm. I should draw them a little closer, but anyway, there are two parallel tubes developing in the splanchnic mesoderm. And remember that these two tubes are being brought up with the head fold as it develops. Now in this picture up here, we have the brain already developing there with the notochord, the nerve cord, the spinal cord going through here. The notochord is just beneath that. The foregut is coming up with the growth of the head fold. Tail is going back that way. In this region right here, we're getting that mesoderm to fold over as it grows up, and this is the area where the heart is forming. Right in through here, we're getting the thickening of tissues, the formation of those paired heart tubes that are developing in there. That's where this all begins. So right in there, remember we have the two parallel tubes forming in that splanchnic mesoderm that's being pulled up, and then eventually as they enlarge, those two tubes fuse together to make one common space in here and begin to pump the blood. This is where the first events of blood movement begin, right through this area of the developing heart. You can see that it's split behind and it's split up in the front, and that will remain that way during the development of the heart. We'll see changes primarily in this section of the heart where things are fused together. So that's what we're going to look at next, the events in that tubular heart during heart development. So what we're looking at in this illustration here is that same tubular heart. This is a lateral view looking at it from the side, from the left side. This would be the front of the heart. This would be the back of the heart. So this would lie up underneath of the developing foregut. There would still be a coelomic space that surrounds most of that. And so you can imagine, put a dotted line around this here. This would all be included within the body cavity that was present there in front of the developing embryo early on. So this has been pulled up and repositioned, that cavity space, and that's going to be the pericardial cavity. The heart, as it grows, that fused portion between the paired back openings and the front openings, as it does that, as it lengthens, it has to kind of reposition itself within that space. Eventually, this back part is going to be moved up to the front, and this part here is going to be moved back below. So it's going to have an exaggerated S shape to it as it develops. Remember up here in the front where it's split, these will eventually develop into paired aortic arches. 6 aortic arches will eventually form through here, but at this stage, this is the first pair of aortic arches, and there's the second. So up here in the front, we have these paired aortic arches. Immediately behind that, there's a section of the heart that's usually referred to as the conus arteriosus. It can be referred to as the bulbus cordis. So it's kind of a trunk leading into that area of the aortic arches. Down here, this area will eventually become the ventricle of the heart. This enlargement up here is the atrium. There's a small area here in the back after these two vessels fuse in the back where they come together here. That is known as the sinus venosus. And then finally, the vessels that come together back here in the back, these are originally, when they first start out, these are called vitelline veins that return blood to the heart. So blood is being pumped this direction through the aortic arches to the dorsal aorta, out to the body and such, and then blood comes back through vitelline veins into the back of the heart here. In the next stage of the heart, it'll look pretty much the same. We'll just move this atrium up a little bit more and the ventricle back a bit more. And we didn't label the pericardial cavity. Okay, here we have another view on the inside of the heart. Now we're looking to the inside. So here's the inside chamber of the ventricle. Here's the inside chamber of the atrium. We can see the tubular passage of the conus arteriosus up here in front. So here's our conus arteriosus. In the back we have our two vitelline veins. We have our sinus venosus. Here, this is ventricle. It's enlarging quite a bit. Here's our atrial chamber here. Atrium. Now, an important reason for having this in a cut view, where we can kind of see the thickness of the wall and the internal chambers. Right here, between the atrium and the ventricle, we have a thickening of tissues from the dorsal side and from the ventral side that are coming together. They're progressing toward one another right here, kind of squeezing this off. But they won't, of course, shut the blood flow off. They'll just come together in the middle with passages to either side. These are referred to as endocardial cushions. So there's a dorsal and ventral endocardial cushions. In the next picture, we'll draw them all the way together, so they'll come together right here, kind of right down the center, they'll fuse together. But to the left and the right, they'll leave a little bit of space for blood to move through between the chambers. So here we are, we finally put together these endocardial cushions. They've come together, separating the atrium and ventricular spaces in the very center of the heart. But remember, to the left and the right side, we still have open passages. To let you know a little bit about what that would look like, we're going to take a look at what it would be like if we cut right through here and looked at that in cross section. So let's draw that over here. There would be the outside of it, and on the inside, we have one side of it that's still open, and another side of it that's still open. And this is where the two endocardial cushions from either side have come together to form a complete division through here. So there's your ventral endocardial cushion, there's your dorsal endocardial cushion component. On this side, this passage through here is the left atrioventricular canal. Where can I label that? Left atrioventricular canal. And on the other side, you have your right atrioventricular canal. And you have this complete septum from fused endocardial cushions right here. Grow across and separate these two passageways, the left and right atrioventricular canals. So you know you in the adult form have two atrial chambers, two ventricular chambers, but at this stage they are still just one atrium, one ventricle, and the only separation is right there between the two, which is where your valves will form, between your atrium and ventricle. Okay, this is just to set up our next drawing, this illustration here. This shows the atrial chamber up above here, ventricular chamber down here, the sinus venosus here, the conus arteriosus in this portion there. So blood's coming in here, to here, to here. We're going to next look at what's going on in the heart to start showing the separation of your two atrial chambers and your two ventricular chambers by making a cut through the heart this direction. So imagine we made a slice through the heart from here down to here. That's what our next picture is going to represent, looking at the face of that cut view of the heart. Okay, here we have our heart in a cut section, more of a frontal section. The familiar things, this is where the blood from the sinus venosus is coming into the atrial chamber from behind. So that's coming in from the back of the heart. This is the wall of the atrial chamber here, the ventricular chamber here, and the endocardial cushion we already know. So we have that canal, the left and right atrioventricular canals that connect on either side of the endocardial cushion. The beginning of the separation of the atrial chambers is seen here with this extension like a curtain from the wall that grows into the middle of the atrial chamber. It divides the two. It's called the septum primum, that curtain of tissue from the wall. From the ventricular wall, we also get a wall here. We're going to call that the interventricular septum. The interventricular septum. So that's the beginning of the separation here. This upper septum is called the septum primum. That means first, prime or first. We're going to have a second one as well. So that's the first of two septa that grow into the atrial chamber to divide it. The opening between the two chambers here is referred to as the foramen primum. This is the next stage in separation of the chambers of the heart. Our interventricular septum is growing up further. Our septum primum will never exactly complete the total separation. This is our septum primum. Here we're seeing the beginning of a second septum growing in right here. This is the septum secundum, just meaning the second septum that grows there. And this is still, this opening here is still our foramen primum. So we're going to see the division of our two atrial chambers and our two ventricular chambers. We've got our two atrioventricular canals. We've got our endocardial cushions here. This is ventricular wall. This is atrial wall here. Okay, now we've progressed a little bit further. We've gone from this condition to the next stage. We have this septum primum coming in here. We had a foramen primum there. Eventually, that curtain of tissue, before it forms a complete separation between the left and the right atrial chamber, it develops a hole in it. So that septum never really forms a complete septum to divide the left and right atrial chambers. This new hole that forms in here is referred to as the foramen secundum. So we have a lower portion of the septum primum and then an upper portion of the septum primum, and then we have the septum secundum also going down here. There's still a little bit of connection between the two ventricular chambers. There's an interventricular foramen, a space between the two ventricles here. Eventually what we're going to see is this septum secundum will grow down, completely covering that opening between the left and the right atrial chambers. So that will be complete, and this interventricular septum will grow up in here and completely separate the two ventricular chambers below. Okay, finally we have our almost completely divided heart into left and right sides. Our ventricular chambers are completely separated. This would be the right side heart over here. This is the left side of the heart over here. This is where the sinus venosus enters on the right atrial chamber here. The separation of the two atrial chambers is just not quite complete. There's a little bit of a gap between the septum secundum and this part of the septum primum that forms kind of a valve to the opening between the two chambers, the right and left chambers of the atrial chambers. So that works as kind of a valve flap in there that allows some movement of blood between the two chambers. Eventually, after birth, this will seal off so that we don't see movement of blood across from the one chamber to the other. So we have still the opening of the sinus venosus. We have the two atrial chambers, right atrial chamber and left atrial chamber. We have that endocardial cushion still in here. We have yet to form the valve flaps between the atrium and ventricular chamber. We have the interventricular septum now complete. There's no longer a foramen between the two ventricular chambers. And so, like I say, after birth, this will completely fuse together through here between the septum secundum and the base of that septum primum here, so that the right and left chambers should eventually work as separate chambers.